Hello, I'm Mary Kalantzis, and with me is Bill Cope, and we're coming to you from the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. Unfortunately, we were hoping to join you there for the 15th International Conference on E-Learning and Innovative Pedagogies. We want to thank Professor Yuling Yu for all she has done and for inviting us to speak this morning. But we would have liked to come and visit the National Tsinghua University there in person, and maybe one day we'll be able to do that.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting us, Yuling. We're very pleased to be here. So our starting point really when we're talking about e-learning is, look, this is hasn't come upon us all that suddenly. The future's been a long time coming. This is an image from B.F. Skinner's work from the early 1950s, 1954, in fact, where he created a teaching machine. This was mechanical. The student there had a card and answered some questions and got it right or wrong. But if we, as we move on, the first computerized teaching machines, in fact, a long time ago, 1959, here at the University of Illinois, where we work now, this was the terminal that was linked up to the mainframe computer there. And this was a project which over a number of years really pioneered the whole world of e-learning.
Right. Quite frankly, although e-learning and the possibility has been with us for a long time, colleges of education and universities generally have been pretty slow to take up and explore the possibilities. And then, of course, COVID turns up. It's still here. That's why we're here and you're there. And suddenly we're all remote for all sorts of purposes. And we need to reflect seriously on what we've learned from this moment and what the possibilities are. Of course, one step could be going back and doing what we always did, except that we did it online. You could see this picture here. These students are all in a row. They're all on the same page. They're all looking to the teacher. There's nothing very different pedagogically about this kind of learning, although it's done with machines.
And in fact, if you take all these things here, which are supposedly new, they're actually pretty close to being old. The flipped classroom's just a recorded lecture. The e-textbook has just taken it off paper and made it electronic. The learning management system is just like a syllabus with all the week after week, the readings you've got to do. Procedure-based intelligent tutors replicate, a lot of procedural learning. Clickers are just put up your hand and answer the question. The electronic whiteboard is the blackboard at the front of the classroom, except it's now electronic. Computerized select response is just conventional assessment, and so on. So we have all these artifacts, which in a way, what they do is they bring back to life older pedagogies, which are didactic and mimetic. That's what we mean by fossilizing things. But in fact, in education, there's been a whole lot of long-standing aspirations for active learning, collaborative learning, problem solving, creativity, all those good things, as far back as Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was appalled by the modern classroom, the wonderful Indian educator Tagore, Montessori, John Dewey. So for a long time, there's been kind of resistance against these pedagogies. And what we have here in this diagram is a kind of models of teaching and learning. So the one on the left is what a lot of e-learning is currently like, didactic or mimetic. Didactic in the sense that the teacher is an authoritative figure who's really transmitting knowledge to learners. Mimetic means you're meant to copy what you've been told, the knowledge that you've been given in the textbook or the lecture. You go to the test and you prove that you've remembered it. You can replicate that, mimesis. But what we're arguing, and in fact, what Rousseau might have been arguing, and John Dewey and Maria Montessori and Tagore, the whole lot, was what we call reflexive or ergative, a community of interaction, but also work-oriented, project-based work where you're making things, you're actually making knowledge, not just a knowledge absorber and knowledge consumer. So our question is then, if we move on to the next point, is that in fact, technology is pedagogically neutral. You can replicate old-fashioned pedagogies very easily in these spaces, that left-hand model that we had there. But our question is, how could we move to that right-hand model And our answer to that is, well, technology has affordances. Affordance is a nice word. It means possibility. We can do lots of stuff. There's nothing predetermined about technology, but we can do a range of things. And what are its affordances to return to those old progressive traditions? And I'm going to hand over to Mary, who's going to then give a summary of the argument of the rest of our paper before we get into it. So here she is.
Right. So through our research and practice, we've come up with 7 affordances. There could be others, but these are the 7 main ones that we've delineated, and we're going to speak about them for the rest of our conversation with you. But you see at the center, we've called it an agenda for new learning, which relies also on new assessment. You can't get to new learning with the old ways of testing. We need to rethink how we evaluate and assess. And our argument is that there are new affordances in the technology, in the digital, that will allow us to do that. I won't go through these 7 now because we're going to do each one of them. I'm going to introduce each one. Bill is then going to elaborate a little on what it actually means for practice. And then I'm going to give you an example from a platform we've created here at the University of Illinois that tries to realize these affordances in practice, in the practice of teaching and learning, our own teaching and learning. So the first one, of course, is multimodal meaning. The digital allows multimodal meaning. We can click and get an image or a sound, and every kind of meaning making that happens now involves these expanded tools for knowledge representation and for engaging. And it means that the learners are able to use video and audio on inexpensive devices. It's so easy now, even little children are creating multimodal communication with others around them. So our case is that modern communications need to involve multiliteracies, be they linguistic or technologically oriented, and as in the term multimodality. How do we as educators address this? How do we prepare them for the world of multiliteracies and multimodality? And most of our students, when they're not in school, are working in these new media spaces for entertainment, for learning, for communicating. So what do we do? How do we harness it for teaching and learning?
So Mary mentioned the word multiliteracies and also this term multimodality. So what we have at our disposal is all these forms of meaning, all of which can be represented digitally. So even objects in 3D printing, but also you can photograph an object, body in video, there's a lot of gesture involved in video. So in fact, all of these modes of meaning are very much part of the world of today's literacies. So traditionally, literacy was about text in this model we've got here. But in fact, what we're doing in the world of new media, the world of digital media, is we're constantly moving backwards and forwards between these things. So if we're on Instagram doing selfies, it's between body and image. We might write a caption, which is text. We might, so all of these things. So our theory of multimodality is that there are these different forms of, we call them forms of representation and communication. And what there is all the time is transpositions. So when you make an Instagram post, you've got a picture there and you write a caption with it. And it's a movement between text and image, the one speaking to the other. That's what this kind of...
As we're doing now.
As we're doing now. So, and by the way, we're gesturing and we're talking and we've got an image up there, we've got words, we've got a visualization. So we're doing something which is profoundly multimodal. Now, the irony with conventional literacy, when you do, nouns and verbs in sentences, or when you do novels, you're isolating your meaning to a single form or a single mode, that's text. And the irony is that almost all our communication these days is multimodal, which is why we need to build a kind of a theory of multimodality, which is what we've done here. Now, one little point we'd like to make is that Here you can see these colors. It's a kind of like a rainbow thing where the colors are change, but we've deliberately contrasted text with speech. And one of our arguments is these are incredibly different things. Text, like image, is the array of graphemes in space. And speech, like sound, happens in time. Just in terms of existentially how they work, they're very, very different. So the irony is what we used to do in literacy, which is about the transliteration of speech into text. These things are just so different, it doesn't bear thinking about. Now, in terms of multiliteracies, the next slide, this is the whole theory of multiliteracies in one slide. So sorry, it's a bit dense. On the right-hand side, we've got these different forms of meaning, and there are transpositions going on between all of those things, especially in digital media. So multi-form, that's one of the multis. But the other point that we want to make really as much as we can, and as powerful as we can, is multi-situational. So, you know, what we used to do in literacy is learn a single standard form of literacy. But in fact, in a global world, in a world of different discourse communities, for example, technology discourse communities compared to perhaps Instagram, or, you know, like, I mean, there's just so much variety. And what we're doing is all the time, we're moving between these different worlds, these different communication worlds, which have their own, if you like to use this word metaphorically, their own lingos. So multimodality and multiliteracies are incredibly important to what we're doing. And Mary's going to go on, I think, in the next slide and talk about how we do that in our work.
Right. So this is going to be a recurring slide, the Common Ground Scholar slide, because we've invented a space where we can realize what we're professing. So it's not good enough just to have these theories. How might they work? Well, we've invented a platform, this one that you can see here, that has a text editor which allows for multimodality. You can put in an image, you can put sound, and you can put it in line order. On the right-hand side is a rubric, of course, because the teacher still needs to guide the creation of artifacts and the creation of knowledge. But the main point we're making here is that learners are creators, and they can use multimodal tools in order to make meaning across the disciplines. And I know some of you there with Professor Yuling are looking at the power of that in composition writing.
So our second point is about ubiquitous learning. I'll hand over to Mary to talk about this.
Right. So that's the second affordance. Ubiquitous learning, of course, means anywhere, anytime. And it is possible now because we carry these devices in our pockets and are able to communicate anywhere in any place. But what it has created is different ways of relating to each other, different agency. It allows a voice of many people. And there's no difference now between being in person or far away, as we are now in talking to you. And also the ubiquitous learning allows for transcending the bounded room of space, you know, the one teacher, 30 students, you know, it allows for different timetables. It allows for different times of learning with 1 student, 2 students, 20 students, and networking. And of course, importantly, because everything leaves a trace in the digital space, it allows for transparency. Your work will never be lost. You could call it surveillance because you know, somebody could go and look at everything you've produced and be able to tell you something about its power to make meaning.
So here's just one example of the shift in the digital world in classroom discourse. So this was a classically oral discourse. So again, this is a little bit about the difference between, the profound differences between writing and speaking. So this was a speaking space. The teacher asked the question, what's the furthest planet in the solar system? And they all put up their hands, see the kids all putting up their hands. And one kid only is able to answer Pluto, and the teacher says, that's correct. That's the classical pattern of classroom discourse, oral classroom discourse, IRE, initiate, respond, evaluate. That's why it happens. Now, what we've done in Scholar is we've built a discussion board environment, where there's a post, and I think it's actually the slide after this. We don't actually, the slide, we'll get to the slide later. So we've got a discussion board environment, and the difference with which in Scholar is called community. But the difference with discussion boards in general is you can ask everybody to respond, right? There are lowered barriers to response. It's always the wrong person who puts up their hand and is most keen to give the answer. But also what it does, even in a discussion board format, it's a shift from the oral to the written. And it gives you a little bit of time to think about it, and you're more likely to write it in a full sentence, which has a subject as well as a predicate. Oral speech is really mostly just predicates because we've assumed the subject. So it's a very, very different kind of linguistic form. But also, number 4, when everyone responds, learner differences become visible and valuable. Maybe one kid should complain that Pluto is not a planet anymore, and it was for a while and now it's not, and why is it not that? And in fact, there's no knowledge in the world where there's not some discussion that's possible, which is not possible in the conventional IRE pattern. It's highly engaging, which is everyone's got to respond. You can't be just sitting there listening to somebody else's answer, which is pretty low demand. But also the read write, you're actually getting people to read stuff, the prompt or the input, and then give. And so in other words, you're not just sitting there listening, which is a passive thing in a classroom. One kid answers while everyone else listens, but everybody, there's this mix of participation exactly as there is in Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and the like. So, and what we can do also is, the most important thing though, is that this, just like the shift to literacy, means that we don't have to do this synchronously in the same 4 walls, in the same cell of the timetable. This can happen overnight. It can be asynchronous. You can come in later and add a comment. But also everyone can be an initiator. You can start a conversation in spaces like this, and people often do. But the last point, which we're going to really elaborate upon later in the talk, is there's a new transparency. So in other words, we can check that everybody answered, and we can see how much they answered. We can analyze that because they've left a recorded trace.
Now, just to be clear, what Bill just described in these 9 points is what we actually do in the CG Scholar space, in the community app, right? So each one of these slides is about what we do, not just what we say about the affordances of the digital.
And look, it's part of our research agenda. Our research agenda is to work with theoretical concepts, try them out in practice, refine the theory, and so on. So what we're giving you here is the kind of theory, and every now and then we're mentioning what our practice is.
Right. So the third affordance that the digital allows us is something we call active knowledge making on the part of the learner. So the learner is not just a consumer, but the learner actually participates in the making and can produce knowledge. And the hierarchy disappears as learners can become co-creators of the knowledge together with the instructor. But what you see in the digital space is the potential to shift in education just from cognition and memorization to the creation of artifacts that are representations of your knowledge rather than just memorizing for a test. So of course, using the digital allows you to be part of a participatory community, and it develops the skills and sensibilities of what we used to call the knowledge society or the knowledge economy. It continues to be the most powerful, growing phenomenon in our lives.
Let me track back for a second to the origins of one of the great modern artifacts. The inventor the designer of Western monasticism was St. Benedict. In about 530, he made this rather famous quote. So, and in fact, out of monasticism comes the modern university with its colleges, which are kind of like monastic places, and modern schooling. In a way, this model of the teachers speaking and the students listening. So what we're trying to do with Scholar is build something which is much more dialogical and which gives much more space for conversation and dialogue than is possible in a conventional environment. And rather than be a knowledge consumer, passively listening to what the master says, you increasingly become a knowledge creator as well. This is an image from Foucault's Discipline and Punish, which is the classical picture of the architecture of a classroom. You really shouldn't be talking to each other. The teacher's at the front and you should be quietly listening. So what St. Benedict invents in 530 then becomes a modern institutional form, the most extreme version of which is this prison education that Foucault looks at there. So
now, if we go back to the CG Scholar Space and its affordances, it has a section called Publishing. And in that space, what we do is take up what the learner has produced, the way they've curated the world and summarized the world, and publish it in its multimodal form. And they then contribute to the curriculum, they contribute to the resources that are available, and they can see their work having meaning, and it becomes part of their portfolio. So it's a very important part of the process of becoming creators and seeing your work published. Right, now the fourth and really very important affordance of the digital is that it allows for recursive feedback, and this is critical. That is feedback from multiple sources. You can get feedback from your teacher, from your peers, from other people outside. You can provide feedback on your feedback. And it's about not just about the past, it's about thinking about the future as well. And in our environment, particularly, it is possible to have a no failure education paradigm. Yes, truly you can, because if the idea is to reach mastery, to get to a certain point, you can do something again and again until you get there. So we're ending the distinction between formative and summative assessment because both are integral to the way somebody learns. And moving learners and teachers to what we call reflexive pedagogy, where you're thinking all of the time, how does this make sense? How does it connect to the subject area? Does it make meaning? And it allows something that's now become very important, what we call big data, because everything is tracked, everything is recorded in what we call semantically legible data points. We can make sense of a learner's progress, of their needs, of their shortcomings, of what makes them exceptional.
So let's contrast that for a second with traditional assessment models. This is the classic norm reference model where, even if the students come in on the presupposition they're all going to be able to succeed, we insist on spreading them across the curve like this. In other words, we insist that a certain percentage are not very smart and a certain percentage are ordinary, and only just a few can ever be smart enough. So we insist on doing that. What we're talking about, though, is more in the order of criterion reference. In other words, if all the students are in there in this kind of environment, incrementally, they can do the work and they can reach the criterion. They can potentially all reach proficiency. We're operating on a different kind of logic. And I want to track back to Benjamin Bloom, who first mentioned this idea of mastery learning in 1968, a long time ago, which was, how can we change instruction so that more achieve? We don't assume that, aptitude at the beginning is going to be achievement at the end, and the bell curve stays the bell curve. And one of our arguments is, in an environment like Scholar, it's incremental feedback. It's peer interaction, all the things that Benjamin Bloom wanted in mastery learning. He advised all those things in the 60s, but in fact, it wasn't practicable. And in these very social environments with incremental feedback and big data and so on, our argument is that it's now possible. Now, just a very quick excursion into this idea of big data. Every little interaction in these learning environments can be instantly recorded. There can be all sorts of types of data. There can be qualitative stuff and quantitative. There can be different types of interaction that are going on. And it kind of sits there. And what we need to do is add data analytics over that, which makes sense and which feed back to the teacher and the student, which is what we've done in Scholar. So on the left is a table with all sorts of data on a whole lot of different measures. The green is a standard deviation above the norm and the red's a standard deviation below. But what we've also done is on the right-hand image is we've produced visualizations which give feedback all the time to the learner. So the circumference of the circle is what our expectations are in a particular unit of work or particular course, whatever the unit of learning is. The teacher can set these expectations. Then we have all these different measures here, and that as you start off with 0, and as you work away, you gradually move towards the outside on 3 different measures. One is knowledge, which is things you've demonstrably learned. Focus, which is, okay, the amount of effort you put in, but also help, collaboration, the ways in which you've given feedback to your peers. Now, in fact, these settings, the width of the circumference of the circle and the width of each of the petals in this aster plot, and aster is a type of daisy, they can be set by the teacher. But what the student is able to do all the time is look it up and see what progress they're making. So apropos of mastery learning, we can say to the student, look, you can all get there. Just keep on working at this until you colour all the petals, if you like.
Right. Now, I just want to emphasize those 3 areas in which we collect data, because it demonstrates our pedagogy, our values, and the goals we have for learners. Of course, knowledge is important, but you can see here it's 1/3 of what we assess. Because we're working in an online environment, you need to know the degree to which learners are actually engaging. So focus and collaboration matters in that online environment. But equally important, and I want to emphasize this, help has equal weight. Because collaborative learning, peer-to-peer learning, our research shows us that peer-to-peer learning over time is equal to instructor or expert feedback. And it is important to produce learners who can collaborate to make meaning, learn from each other. We don't have ideas of cheating, learning from each other, citing each other, helping each other, all of them to succeed, we think really creates a better citizen, learner, and worker.
On which subject? Collaborative intelligence.
Yes. Sorry, Bill, you went very quickly. Right. So collaborative intelligence, of course, is one of the affordances, another one of the affordances of the digital. We always wanted collaborative intelligence, but again, the one teacher, 4 walls, 30, 40 kids or learners made it very difficult to realize to the degree that the digital allows, so that nobody has to remember things now because they're making knowledge and they're making it together in a social way. And we're creating problem solvers who can address very complex issues together. So the motivation and the rewards are around collaborating, not just a mark at the end through a test. So we do believe that peer-to-peer, or what's called stickiness in the social media area, is just as important in the learning environment. How do learners engage with each other, motivate each other, and advance together?
So this is the opposite of collaboration. When you get to the test and you've got to say what you've remembered. So, firstly, knowledge is very social, and we've probably done it together. And this is a reduction of knowledge to this lowest common denominator of long-term memory. So this is kind of, if you like, the paradigm of what we're trying to move away from. So what we have in here is we have a community, for example, where there's, as I said, lots of stuff going on. It's modeled on a kind of social media logic. You can see it's got an activity stream down the middle there. And what we're doing is we're mining that, all those activities for not just what you have learned, but the knowledge you have made and the interactions you've had with others in the process of being in that community and interacting in that community.
All right. Let me add also that in the real everyday space where our students come into our learning space, both the community side and the creator side involves peer-to-peer interaction, which ends up in the analytics, right? So it's a continuous cycle of learning collaboratively and learning from each other. Right. So our sixth affordance of the digital is metacognition. And it's about not just memorizing things, but the epistemology of learning, so that you're thinking about your thinking, a play between the general and the specific. And it's about understanding disciplinary thinking, like what's the nature of history, or what's the nature of science? How is it different? What kinds of resources does it use? What kinds of meanings does it make? Metacognition is critical if knowledge is to be genuine in making future knowledge, rather than just addressing a multiple choice exam.
So I'm going to give an example here of peer-to-peer interactions in Scholar. So we have this notion of a project where the student writes using a rubric. They give feedback. Let's say in this, it could be giving feedback to 2, 3, 4, 5. But in this example, we've got 2 lots of feedback that the student gives. What they then do is they revise using the feedback in the rubric, and they do a self-review. And then, as Mary said, these get published, they get shared. It's public knowledge that gets shared amongst the group. So there are many, many points of feedback and many types of feedback that are going along the way. Now, this small image at the top is just to remind you of the image we had earlier. So there are 2 sides to the screen, the creator screen. One is on the left, multimodal knowledge representations, where the student is writing and putting in videos and putting in audio, and it's genuinely multimodal. And then on the right, we have rubrics and peer review and discussion and self-review. And what we're doing between the left side and the right side of the screen is we're working between cognition and metacognition. So the left, one example is we've got kids in grade 4 who are doing a project about animals. So on the left, in their animals project, what they're doing is, I might be looking at snakes because I really like them, and you might be looking at panthers because you really like them. So the cognition is about something empirical, which you're doing, but the metacognition is, well, how do I adequately describe an animal, its life cycle, its habitat? What are the elements of an adequate scientific explanation of an animal? The example in this particular screenshot is, in fact, a medical student doing something on autoimmune diseases. So what we want to do is, on the left, we've got some concrete learning activity, disciplinary practice. We're doing empirical work, which is this autoimmune disease or the snake. It's about individual intelligence. I'm working by myself to do this, to build this thing. And it's about knowledge representation, multimodal knowledge representation. But then what we're doing on the right side of the screen is we're managing the project. We're thinking in disciplinary terms because, in fact, how does one describe animals? How does one describe disease? We're doing theoretical work based on, and also collaborative intelligence, because this is where we interact with each other in a very social kind of way. And we're also doing assessment there, where there is formative assessment, which is going on between the peers, teachers, self-assessment, and then learning analytics.
Well, I just want to make one point here. This is a presentation about new technology and its affordances, but in fact, what makes the difference in this space is pedagogy and the design of pedagogy and the pedagogical choices we make that relate to a learner or to a group of learners or to a subject area. So it's not about content sequences, it's about thoughtfulness in that design, and the technology allows you to do it in ways that are sustainable and quite easy to do, actually.
It's also why it might be hard to do. This is a pedagogical design, this screen. It might be, you can't do it in Google Docs because it's the chaotic jumping cursor. It needs to be scaffolded as well. Right. So on to our very last point now.
Differentiated learning, and how important is that? We've always wanted to make sure that every learner's needs are met. And the digital allows you to create learning environments where you don't have to have every learner on exactly the same page. They can go at the pace that they need. They can bring in their values and different identities. It could be the same subject, but they address it from their knowledge position and their values position. And for us, we struggle to find comparabilities and equivalence between the performance of the learners. You don't have to be the same to be equal. Think about that. Equality does not require sameness. It requires comparability and equivalence and equal opportunity to achieve. And the digital allows for differentiated learning, and we can manage learner differences in a much better way than the one-size-fits-all teaching and learning that has been the traditional way we've done things.
So we call this idea productive diversity. So differentiating principle, the logistics of organizing students to do different things, but measuring them on the same scale, the design principle, where there's agency involved. The minute there's agency involved in learning, and the minute you give learners more of a chance to make knowledge, their differences become visible. The collaboration principle, which is let's make diversity work, different perspectives, different points of view. Let's get students giving each other different perspectives in systematic feedback. And the comparability principle, as Mary mentioned, which is how do we rate things which are different on the basis of the general criteria in a rubric. So this is the general idea in the scholar environment. This is an image of a post that's made in a community, and you can see all the comments down below. Because there are multiple comments being made, that allows different points of view to be expressed, as opposed to put up your hand and give the right answer, guess what the teacher wants.
Now, in this environment, it does mean a change also in all the things that we hold dear, the timetable, the curriculum, teacher collaboration. It's really important that teachers can collaborate with each other, with technical people, with designers. We do need teams to work more productively in the production of learners for a future that is complex.
So here's a summary. This is what we've been saying. These are the seven things that we're moving towards. The contrast with the old hub and spoke model there, with this reflexive model there on the right. And our conclusion is these are things we've always aspired to do in education, but now they're easier. And it's a new economy of effort. And because we can do it, we should do it. Okay. And if you want to stay connected with the work that we do, by the way, this is go to CG Scholar, set up an account if you don't have one already, and join the New Learning community, which is effectively Mary and my blog. So cgscholar.com, and then search the New Learning community and join that. We also have a Facebook page and a Twitter feed as well.
Well, just as a final word, we thank you for patiently listening while we're at a distance. But can I say, as we leave you, that we offer you the 7 affordances as something that you can use to evaluate what you're doing in the classroom now, and what tools that you're using, and the degree to which those digital tools realize any of those affordances. So it's also a mechanism for evaluating the possibilities in hybrid environments, in traditional environments, and in digital environments. And really, it's up to you to decide what your values are and whether these affordances enable you now to achieve those values in a way that you couldn't have done that ever before. So thank you very much to all of you for being with us today, and best of luck.
Thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yes, bye-bye.